Hello, Why I Stay family. And this day is the launch of a new series that I'm doing called Listen In. As I was sharing on Instagram, I started getting a lot of antagonism, I think I would say. For me, it really was heavy and I just didn't know what to do with it. And as I prayed, I felt my heart changing and I was able to see the people commenting more than just a comment on my thread, but like people who came from a place of, I think, wanting to reach out to a community that they used to be so much a part of. And I know the story is going to be different for everybody, but what it made me think of is that I need to be better at holding space for other people's narratives and their stories, their journeys that don't look anything like mine. Just talking to people and trying to make these connections, rebuild families, rebuild communities, trying to bring members and former members together in a place where we can coexist peacefully and be each other's advocates, because I just really think that's what Jesus would do. I think he would sit and he would listen. And because I'm so abysmal at listening without trying to interject and fix. I thought maybe some of these lovely souls would come on here and help me learn how to be a better listener. And so the point of these listen in episodes are not to have me convince Mitch, who we have here today, or for Mitch to convince me. We're really not talking about the whys of why they have left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but more of the experience, the feelings, the process, and really connecting on an emotional and empathetic level so that we can understand each other and see each other for humans who act with integrity, even though we might have come to different conclusions about things. And so that's the point, is to learn to hold empathy and understand their stories while also staying true to the one that we've experienced for ourselves. So today we're going to be talking. I'm going to be asking Mitch about his experience. I might be stopping every once in a while and talking through the feelings that I'm having in my heart and letting Mitch coach me a little bit through what might be better to say or not to say, right? And I'm really excited about this. And Mitch, you are the perfect person. Let's introduce you really quick. Mitch Crosgrove is the perfect person to have on this episode, this first listen-in episode, because he has a podcast that is on pause right now, right? Is it on pause? It's on pause right now.
Life's just too busy right now. It will be a couple more years, but I do want to pick it back up.
So it's called Latter-day Saint Bridgebuilders. Is that correct?
Latter-day Bridgebuilders.
Latter-day, okay, yeah, of course.
I didn't want too many syllables in there. And, but anyway.
Latter-day Bridgebuilders, still very catchy, very cool, where he does have a few episodes up already. So, Mitch, do you have anything to add after my long intro that I'll probably edit some of, but do you have anything to add on your end?
Like I said to you before we started, this is the Why I Stay podcast. This is your space. I'm not here to say why you should leave or anything like that. I'm not going to be bringing up like specifics about my issues with the church or criticisms specifically, maybe on like a very high, broad, general level, but nothing to delve deep. I don't want to like be the testimony breaker or anything like that, if that makes sense. So yeah, this is your space. I want to respect that.
Thank you. And I mean, I do want to let you be authentic to your journey, but then we're in this delicate space of trying to preserve the faith of the people who have come here for this purpose for my podcast, but also to honor and really just listen to your journey. So thank you for doing that. And we're just going to work together on that balance and see where it goes, see where it leads us. Okay, listeners, before we begin with Mitch, I wanted to just read the scripture that I came across in James, the book of James. It's James 1:19. And it says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath." And that's what I'm hoping today. And that's what I'm working for myself, because I've seen this in myself before and I'm trying to change. So let's be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Okay.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. All right, Mitch, are you ready for the rapid fire get to know you questions?
Let's do it.
So listeners, we do this for every normal episode. We're going to do it for the listen in episodes with members and former members. So here we go. Mitch, how old are you?
I just turned 30 a couple months ago.
Happy birthday to you. Do you have any nicknames?
Technically, my full name is Mitchell, so Mitch is fine. Back in the day in college, some people would call me Cros, but not so much anymore.
What state do you live in?
I'm in Utah.
What's your favorite food?
Give me a good hamburger. That's all I need.
Okay. What is your current hobby?
When I have time, I play some video games, rock climbing, hang out with my wife and some friends and stuff. So,
Cool. Rock climbing is pretty cool.
yeah.
What is a controversial opinion that you hold? Like everybody loves Crocs, but you hate them.
I might get some hate for this, but I think Taylor Swift might be a little bit overrated. Like, don't get me wrong, she's not terrible. I don't think I'm not saying that. She's a good artist, but I don't see the huge amount of hype, if that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe you and I were just born in the wrong generation, but I kind of agree
Maybe.
with you. I think she's a fantastic businesswoman. I will give her that.
That's good.
She
Yeah.
does know how to run herself as a business. So, but yeah, love it. What is your biggest dream?
Right now it's to graduate. I'm in pharmacy school right now, so I want to become a pharmacist.
Awesome. And this is the last question I've got for you. What is something about you that is the same now as it was when you were in high school?
I think I've always been kind of like a nuanced person in a lot of ways. Like polarizing ideas, ideologies have never really sat well with me, really since high school, and I think I'm still that way. So,
Still that way.
yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so these are our discussion questions. I sent you these beforehand, Mitch, and we're just going to kind of go with them / kind of go where the conversation takes us. And again, if there's anything that I phrase in a condescending way, I want you to point it out, like for sure, point it out. If it's something that you don't want to talk about, point that out. We'll just cut it
Okay.
out. We won't keep it in. And yeah, we'll just go from there. So Mitch, tell us about your background in the church. Did you grow up in the church? Were you a convert, active, not active family? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I never really realized this was a term until I started to leave the church. But I come from pioneer stock, like good stock, quote unquote.
Hmm.
I'm a direct descendant of Brigham Young on my dad's side, and I'm a first cousin to Joseph Smith on my mom's side. So literally, my whole lineage goes back
Wow.
to the foundations of the church.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you guys going to church every week? Did you attend your activities and scout camps and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. As an adolescent child, my parents both kind of came from maybe not like the traditional LDS family. Not to get too much into their stories, but my dad, his parents didn't get sealed until my dad was about 11 or 12.
Mm-hmm.
So they were inactive for most of his childhood. And then my mom, half of her family members are not members of the church. The other half kind of still are. So differences in views from her
Yeah.
side. So, but I think both of them came together and saw that the church was something that really helped them in their lives. And so that's what they taught me and my two younger siblings.
Yeah. I feel like these are things we just kind of want to know to see like the buildup of your story. So,
Sure.
where do you currently fall? I call this on the LDS spectrum. So, like
Mhm.
examples would be former member with records removed, non-believing but still active member, things like that. So, where would you put yourself?
Yeah, I would say I don't believe in the truth claims of the church anymore. And I'm officially no longer a member. I removed my records about 18 months ago.
Mm-hmm. And did you mentioned to me before you no longer believe in God? Would you call yourself an atheist?
Atheist, agnostic, it's kind of like a back and forth kind of thing. I'm not so much like a preachy atheist, saying like, oh, you're stupid for believing in God or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. At the end of the day, I think none of us actually truly know.
So
We
that
all
would
say
put you more on the
on the
agnostic
agnostic side.
side.
So, yeah.
Okay.
But at the same
Okay.
time, I don't believe in like a personal God either. So,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so tell me about, can you pinpoint when you started to have a faith transition? Like how old were you? Where were you at the time? Were you in school, career? And what did that feel like?
Sure. I think like most people, faith and belief kind of goes in waves up and down, right? So growing up in the church, I always felt very spiritual. I always felt like I had a very good connection to what I was taught was the Holy Ghost, right? And that was something that, my mom tells me stories of even as like a 4-year-old, 3-year-old kid, like we said a prayer because I lost a toy and I described something like springs in my head, kind of this like tingly sensation that I recognized as the spirit and felt that throughout my entire life. In high school, post high school, I kind of wavered in belief with God, but not so much in the sense that I do like now. It wasn't like I don't believe in God at all. It was just kind of like, where are you? Are you there? Do you care about me? Kind of feelings. Just a very dark time in my life. So I actually didn't serve a mission until I was
Can
12.
I ask
Oh yeah,
why?
yeah. So like a lot of what I've come to find, a lot of male members of the church and a lot of female members as well. As an adolescent, I struggled with pornography, masturbation kind of stuff, to be frank. And I never really felt worthy. And that is a whole conversation. I could talk about that for several hours. But to put it briefly, I guess I could just say that I never really felt like I could fully trust myself, overcome that kind of thing. I would turn to God and get better for a little while and then kind of fall back. And because of that, I couldn't serve a mission when I was 18. My graduating class was the first ones with the age change. My peers were going on their missions right after high school for the first time that this has ever happened, right? For the men at least. And so I went to school for a year and came back and worked for a couple of years and then kind of had a come to Jesus moment in that sense. And really felt like I gained a stronger testimony of God and Jesus Christ. Felt like I could, overcome those difficulties, and I wanted to serve a mission. So I went on a mission at age 22, which is a little bit more unorthodox for our, at least the Utah culture, right? So there was that time in my life, kind of like post graduation to pre-mission, that I wavered in faith, but not like to the extent that I did a couple years ago, with my faith crisis really like, hit the fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that first happened December 5th, 2021. Like, I know the exact day, and because it was just so life-changing for me, and just had a very dark night of the soul. Like I said, I won't get into major specifics, but I guess I just had questions and I wasn't sure where to turn. So I turned to God in prayer, and the answer I got back was, it's not true. And those feelings of feeling the Spirit in my life tell me that it was true, and then feeling those exact feelings tell me that it wasn't, was just very confusing for me for a while. And it was a slow exit for sure.
Can I ask a quick interjecting question?
Yeah.
Listeners, I don't know if you're thinking the same thing that I am, but like in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, how can you hear something from the Spirit that's negating itself? So anyway, I mean, you don't need to answer that, because I just want to say to the listeners, you might have that same thought in your head. And I'm just pausing here, not because I wanted to say it, but this is not the time. Like, if you're having the first conversation with a person who's like bearing their soul, and thank you so much, Mitch, for being so willing and saying all these things. Like, it is really impactful, and I am feeling the emotion behind all of this. Like, I really am feeling the connection over this. But listeners, like, I have to stop myself from interjecting and trying to argue through like his experience, right? Try and convince him that like the interpretation of his experience isn't the one he was supposed to come to, right? Like, and so even though I just interjected, it's not to like get into it with me, Mitch, but just to remind myself and the listeners, like, that's not why we're here. We're trying to teach ourselves to just listen. So anyway, that was kind of a tangent, but I wanted to try and work through that out loud with the listeners. For sure.
And to your point, I mean, it's not an easy question. Like, it took me months to figure out the answer to that question for myself, why I felt this discrepancy in the Spirit. So, and I came to my conclusion. Anyone else can come to theirs, and that's totally fine, right? So,
right. And that's the whole thing, is that at the end of the day, like, we have to honor the journey of the person that's sitting across from us. Right. We don't know. I can't know what happened in your mind and in your heart. And we have to remember that when we're having these difficult conversations with our friends and family.
For sure.
Okay, so I totally cut you off. Where were we at?
Oh, no. Are you familiar with Jared Halverson? So I actually took an institute class of his like a month later after that kind of first thing. He had like this course called Navigating Trials of Faith. So I was like, oh man, this is answer to prayer. Let me take this, and I'll get better. I'll gain my testimony back, at least to a degree. Like, I don't need to gain it all the way back to where I was. And that's kind of his whole spiel that he teaches, is that there's a creation, a fall, and an atonement, where you maybe have like a creation naive level of faith to begin with. Something major happens in your life and you have like this fall, and he believes that people will generally come to this atonement phase where it's kind of like this nuanced view of things and takes the good aspects of both parts. And I really liked his course. I really liked what he taught. I felt like, I can make this work. I can make this happen. But a month or two after, I kind of discovered some things that really, really upset me. Specifically with the temple, the history of the temple. It was something that I couldn't reconcile. And I think kind of at that point anyways, I was already starting to question things and kind of barely holding on. But that was, there was like 2 shelf breaker moments for me, I guess you could say. And there was other parts of my experience that kind of led up to that.
Mm-hmm.
other questions I had had and things like that. Part of this question is, how did I feel during that time? It was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
so heavy. Like,
Was it devastating?
crisis is the best word I can use to describe it, right? I think that's why we often use that term, is because
Mm-hmm.
like my worldview was just crumbling, and what am I left with at the end of that, right?
Right.
And I just wasn't sure where I would end up. Growing up in the church, I was kind of taught often that the worst place to be was an atheist, an ex-member of the church, an apostate. And I don't know, like that's kind of what I am now in a lot of ways. But I guess in my experience, even though it was very hard to go through that, I'm on a much better side of it now.
So another thought that I had when Mitch said that, like the things that he was taught, I found that a lot of people who come and talk to me on Instagram often say things about their church experience and what they learned at church and their upbringing don't align with what I
Yeah,
was taught. So now's not the time to be like, well, that's not what I was taught, or whoever taught you that is a dummy. Like,
yeah.
like
Sure.
this is not the time. This is his experience. Responsibility is to listen.
Yeah.
So and going on from that, so like you feel like, okay, now you're considered the apostate, like what you were taught growing up. And so I want to ask, were you married at this time, and where's your wife at in this experience? Is she still in the church, and how did it feel to tell your wife and your family?
For sure. So I told my wife that night, that night in December when that kind of happened, and it was kind of coincidental. She brought up to me, like, we're just like having that pillow talk, in bed.
Mm-hmm.
We'd been married for 2.5 years by this point, and we had a daughter who's about 5 or 6 months old, our oldest, and I think just out of nowhere she just kind of asked me, like, do you ever like kind of question like the church or whatever, or like have issues or something like that? And I was like, actually, let me tell you about what I went through earlier today. I was just very open and honest with her, and I think that's kind of been my whole MO throughout all this, is I want to be open and honest with those close to me about my experience, as much as they'll let me, and as much as is healthy for the
Yeah.
conversation.
Quick, a follow-up question. So were you dealing with these other pieces of your faith crisis, like the leading up? Had you told anybody about that, or were you trying to just deal with it on your own
Yeah, I
before
guess the
then?
things leading up, because I didn't get into the specifics of it. The things leading up to it was, I guess, one thing I did kind of touch on. Part of my story was pornography and masturbation, and I found a resource that really helped me get that under control without using prayer, scripture study, kind of the traditional methods that I had tried in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of another question in my mind, is like, oh, like I've tried
Why
to
didn't these things
work on this
work?
for years. Like I've
Yeah.
tried, church programs, all this stuff. Why didn't that work necessarily? But this other thing that was still LDS centered, podcast specifically, is still run by, I think she's still a member of the church, as far as I know. So that was kind of like one thing leading up to it, and I was talking to my wife about kind of that experience. So staying open and honest with her about my faith crisis, all of a sudden, I think she was a little like when she brought up that thing at night. You ever have any questions like, oh, actually, like I kind of read into a bunch of stuff today, and this is what I felt, and what does that mean? I think that was a little bit too much for her at the time. She wasn't
Sure.
expecting that. But it did kind of leave the door open for a conversation, which I feel like I'm really lucky with. Learning from fellow ex-members' experiences. That's not always the case. Sometimes they'll hide it for whatever reason for weeks, months, years even, and never tell their spouse what's kind of going on and what's going on with their faith because of the implications of that, right?
Yeah.
Could dissolve my eternal marriage. Sometimes things end in divorce. Mixed faith marriages, how do we raise kids in that environment?
Mm.
Lots of questions, so it can be very scary. So one of her friends had recently posted on Facebook about a faith crisis that she had, and she decided to stick with the church. So I messaged her like 2 days after, that experience. We went up and visited her. That's how I learned about Jared Halverson, and we were trying to like make it work. My wife was still very much believing at this point in time, even up until the point of the spring, like summer after, which is kind of when I really had that news about the temple that really shook me. And it was rocky for about a month, like really rocky during that time, that summer with her.
And by rocky, you mean like, yeah, your marriage, your relationship, or?
Yeah, like it's so interesting because I feel like our relationship was never bad. Like really the only differences we had was this difference of viewing of the church and the doctrine. And I mean, we weren't talking about divorce, but it came up in like maybe one conversation, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking like, whoa, man, like what if I lose a marriage and a child like in this as well? Like, what's that going to mean? So I was very lucky in that my wife decided to, in her own time and in her own way, find out about things as well. And she, through her own decisions, also decided to leave. She hasn't officially removed her records for personal reasons, but I mean, neither of us have attended for 2 years at this point, at least, unless like family things, mission.
Yeah. What about your parents? How have they responded to this whole thing?
Um, It's been a work in progress for sure. I am the oldest. At the time, I was the only one of my siblings who had served a mission. And I think it was tough for them, and probably still is, just seeing me kind of being at like this one spot with the church and really, working hard, going on a mission at an older age, and being kind of this like very spiritual stalwart person in the church. And then all of a sudden to be where I am today, kind of a night and day difference in a lot of ways. And so we've had a conversation, some of them harder than others, some of them more heated, but overall, I feel like today we have a very good relationship still.
So thinking about this in terms of like a community and the ward, did anybody in your ward know what you were going through? And if they did, what did they do? What did they not do? And are you happy with how it all played out? Whatever
Yes
the
and
answers
no.
are. Okay. That's a lot of questions. So
yeah, for sure. Another part of my story, I guess. So timeline. December of 2021 is that Dark Night of the Soul. The last time I went to church, like with the intention, like I'm going to church, was on Pioneer Day the next year, 2022.
Okay.
So July. So in this is the time frame, right? So in March, I had shared a testimony where I'm kind of like still struggling with stuff, but like I want to believe. I got up and bore my testimony, and what little testimony I had, and it was like, I don't know everything, but I want to stay here. So maybe some people had an inkling because of that, but really it didn't really come up. But that's also on me. I didn't share it for multiple reasons. Maybe it's not the time or place at church to kind of share like doubts, right? But it kind of all came to a head on Pioneer Day that year because I got asked to speak in church, and I had lost my faith at this point. So I let the bishopric member know, like, kind of where I was, because he wanted to talk to me. He wanted me to talk about like my conversion to Jesus Christ. I'm like, I don't know how to put this. Yeah. So I was like, I'm more than happy to talk, but what if I talk about things I appreciate about Jesus Christ, like things that I enjoy, not necessarily my conversion. He was very, very empathetic and wanted to listen to me. And so we had a phone call. He's like, okay, well, I think you could still give a talk if you want. And so I did. And in that talk, I kind of over the pulpit shared that I don't share the same conclusions about the church. And that was very, very interesting. That was actually a great day at church that last day I went because, for the most part, because in Elders Quorum afterwards, do you know who Dan Witherspoon is? Anyway, he was in my ward. And he's kind of has nuanced views on things, but attends every week still, I think. And anyway, he was in my ward at the time, and lots of circumstances. He made me feel like really welcome. Dozen people came up to me after I gave that talk and said, "Hey, I've been feeling something similar," so forth. So I felt really supported by the members of my ward for the most part, but I did not feel that from the leadership, unfortunately.
And why, like, do you feel comfortable sharing like why you felt that like way, what vibes you were getting?
Sure. Long story short, because of what I said, which really wasn't anything like crazy, like groundbreaking, I didn't share any specifics, right? In fact, my talk is on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it. But not only was my temple recommend revoked, but my wife's was threatened to be revoked as well.
That day?
And a week later, 6 days.
Did you guys have any meetings in between the time you gave your talk and
we talked
the temple recommend?
That day after church, after that Sunday that I gave the talk, we talked to the bishop and felt we're pretty good. We kind of explained where we were on things, and the bishop gave like, okay, if you want to keep your temple recommend, you need to do X, Y, Z. And she's like, okay, I can do that. I personally was like, I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to kind of back out. I won't attend the temple.
Like having your temple recommend revoked, did that feel shocking to you, even though you were like okay with it? Or help me understand that a little bit better.
And maybe there was some miscommunication between me and the bishop at the time, but it did feel like very shocking all of a sudden, like from that Sunday feeling like, okay, we're doing all right. Like we have a place here still, to 6 days later, not even a meeting in between, I get a random text from my bishop saying like, hey, I talked to the stake president. We feel like it's in the best interest that we need to revoke your temple recommends. And so like, if it was just me, if that had just happened to me, I think I could have been like, all right with it. I probably would have still been a little bit hurt, but the fact that my wife was brought into that, I didn't understand. And well, she did not end up having her temple recommend removed, but I think that was because of some pushback that I gave. If I would have just let it happen, I think it might have happened still.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, interesting is probably not the right word, but
Sure.
a lot of times I find myself trying to defend the bishop in stories that I hear like this. It's easy to try and like fill in the gaps depending on who you feel like is the hero in the story. But something I'm working on is just not filling in the gaps. It's like if I'm sitting down and listening to Mitch's story right here, this is Mitch's story. If I were to sit down and listen to the bishop's story, that would be his story. But right now I'm listening to Mitch, and my point is to hear Mitch and understand him and just listen with my heart. And so I have to work really hard to not try and justify or fill in the blanks. Anyway, sorry, continue on, Mitch.
But I do agree with what you were saying. Like there's story that part of, I don't know the bishop's side of that story in a lot of ways. That's just kind of what happened. And I did talk with the stake president shortly after that to try to get some understanding and like what was going on. That's how I found out that my wife's recommend had not been removed, but mine was. So I just kind of like, I don't know. I just didn't feel comfortable going to my own ward again after that.
Yeah.
And no hate towards this bishop at all. Like, I think he's a great guy. I sent him my resignation letter. Like, personally, like, I still wanted to kind of keep him in touch. And I still even attended another institute class after that to try to work things out and kept him in the loop on stuff. But, yeah, that was just kind of my experience. So I felt really, really good from the ward in general at that time, but the leadership kind of top down was a little bit disconnected.
That's so interesting. I really, what I think I'm going to find is that there's not enough training around stuff like this.
For sure.
We've got agree. Professionals who can go in and do like mediation and like crisis moderation type things of like helping people and walking through steps and keeping a level head. I can just imagine myself as a leader being like, oh no, like how is this being received by the ward? And now it's my responsibility to like get up and, you know, denounce everything he just said. And maybe it wasn't even like that you had said anything shocking, but like I could see in a leader's mind, it's starting to catastrophize. Even though you obviously had like a significant good welcome, it's okay, buddy, like we're with you experience from the ward members. From the leadership point of view, I can see it being difficult, but like we need training around this. I think all of us can be better equipped with being very delicate and Christ-like and open in communication so that everyone's feelings are as happy and as peaceful as possible, even though this is a really difficult experience. Was there anything else you wanted to say about that piece?
Just like at the time, I was maybe a little bit more angry about things and the way they ended up. Too. Right.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, I think, you know, things happen. We're all people. We make mistakes. Like you said, I think you brought up a great point that there's really no training about how to deal with a faith crisis. Like, I think, I'm sure most people on the internet in the LDS space have heard about the CES letter. I brought that up to the bishop and he's like, I don't even know what that is. And,
oh, really?
I mean, to his credit, he's an older gentleman, probably in his 70s or so, but
yeah.
So it's just kind of like, how do we deal with these things when it's so taboo, maybe is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to talk about it because testimonies and lives are at stake and eternal salvation in a way, I think. That's my view on it.
Yeah. I also am just, oh, my heart, it just like squeezing because in my mind, I have the hero's complex where I imagine myself to be the person who, oh, if I had just been there, right? Like sure. I could have helped. Like we could have done something to at least make the transition easier or better, or even like kept Mitch and his wife from leaving, you know, like I have that problem. and giving up thinking that we really have that much influence over people. If you really study our doctrine, we are just instruments in God's hands. If you're thinking, oh, if I had just been there for my son during this time, if he had just opened up to me, I could have helped him. In our theology, we believe that God is with him every step of the way. These people are in good hands. And Mitch is a good person. And he lives with integrity. He owns his story. We need to help give people space and the ability to have dignity and not think so highly of ourselves to think like, I could have prevented this. Like, this is Mitch's story. Whether he believes there's a God or not, like we believe, it's between him and God, himself and his family, his wife, their partnership. This is their journey to walk. That's my problem.
No, you're okay.
I need to start working on it.
You brought up something that I've thought about in the past is the whole dignity thing. And I think that's one aspect about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that if I could change anything, it would be that people could join the church and leave the church with their dignity still intact. Like, if that makes sense. Like,
yes,
I've thought about this. I went on my mission to a country where most people are Catholic, but they don't practice it. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to baptize people in a sense. Relatively quickly, dozens of baptisms over the 2 years. I think about those people and maybe now that I've experienced a faith transition, how did their families maybe feel about them joining the church?
Right. Now on the other side.
Yeah, on the other side of that. And maybe we could hold a little bit more space for those families that have now lost their family member.
Yeah, lost, right?
Right. Because
and it feels like
Mormonism is often seen as a bad thing among a lot of Christian sects, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so on the flip side of that, I comparatively took a lot longer time to leave the church than some people did to join it. And yet I still kind of feel this way. And I know not everybody feels this way about me, but it's kind of like the voices I paint in other people's heads is like, oh, he's a covenant breaker. He's deceived by Satan. He's insert whatever cliche you will that we may have heard, we may not have heard, but I just think it's unfortunate that sometimes people can't step away and people respect that decision. And I understand why the theology of eternal families is like something that plays into that, and no empty chairs. Sometimes people talk about that in their families. They don't want any empty chairs in heaven or celestial kingdom. Different views. There's all kinds of stuff. But
when you said that, and I mean, this is a slap in the face to me because what you just said, I've had those thoughts. Like, I will just be honest with you. Like, I've had those thoughts about my own friends and family. They're listening to Satan. They're not listening to the Spirit. They're breaking the covenants. They promised, they promised. To me, like, I can't, because I have not had your experience, I don't understand at that level. You know what I mean? And I don't need to go there. I just need to meet you at this spot of like agreeing that this is your experience. And I thought to myself, when you say no empty chairs, what's the likelihood, if we do believe in our theology of making it to eternal life and being able to live with our families and eternally progress, like, what's the likelihood that there will be no empty chairs in heaven if there's empty chairs on earth? You know what I mean? Isn't our first priority to make sure that they still come to dinner here now? Yeah. Like, isn't our first priority to help them feel loved? They know what we're thinking about them. They were there. They were doing the same thing. They know they know how disappointed we must feel. And what is the hardest thing to do, but the right thing to do? I'm convinced, even though I don't do it well or really don't do it, I'm convinced that it is to make sure they still feel like they want to come to dinner. There needs to be no empty chairs now.
Yeah, I agree with that because I don't know, with my kind of agnostic view, like, I don't know what happens after this life, if anything, but I kind of live my life as if there isn't. That's just kind of like my personal way to kind of deal with the nihilism or whatever. But
yeah,
I think the same thing is like, I don't want things to be fixed in the afterlife. What I know is that I experience something here and now, and I've got family and friends here and now. Yeah. Exactly. And come what may, if there is anything post post death, I'll welcome it. But I'd rather try to work on stuff now than wait for a future date.
This has been so, and I couldn't send you an Amazon gift card large enough to thank you for the 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 honesty, like the transparency and the grace that you've given me as I've said these things out loud and admitted to the unchristlike, uncharitable thoughts that have gone through my mind and asked you probing and personal questions. Thank you so much for being willing to be here and let me hear your story and to speak to it in the way that you have. I want to end every single one of these listen in episodes with a hope statement, right? On the Why I Stay episodes, they end with why they stay, right? And that's not going to work here. I don't really want to say, why did you leave? And end it on that, like, or something. What I want to do is end on a positive love building something. And what I came up with is, this is how the question is phrased. Make a hope statement. What do you hope for most in the relationships between members and former members?
My hope is that we can have, like you said, those no empty chairs here and now. And I mean, people in kind of my space, we're often angry, we're often hurt, and we lash out. It's a common response, and I did it. I still do it at times. I'm working on it. But I think I've learned how to like hold my tongue and step back a little bit from kind of my own podcast experience and just like talking with people about this. Because I love talking about philosophical things with people despite religious differences. And as long as we can have like a healthy conversation, when we kind of get into debates, I think that's not so helpful. So my hope is that friends and family, because I think now so more than ever, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints they know somebody who's left or who's questioning, or maybe they don't know, but someone's dealing with questions and they're maybe physically in the church, but mentally they've checked out and they're not there. And my hope is that we can be more open and honest about our conversations with people, and in the end, just build a bridge, right? A bridge meets in the middle over a body of water usually and brings two sides together. So that's what I hope to do with my life.
Beautiful. And just to end on that, with that image of bridge building, and kind of to tie it back to the beginning of the episode where I'm trying to learn to hold space for your experience and hold true to mine at the same time. The bridge doesn't work unless both sides are standing firm and
Agreed.
rooted in their position. And from there, they can reach and meet in the middle. And that's what we're trying to do here. So Mitch, thank you so much for being on this podcast, being my pioneer.
Yeah.
You come from pioneer stock and you are a pioneer now for this.
I do think of myself in a pioneer in some ways. So
you're making a great difference in the world. And I really believe that this is the beginning of a great work. And I couldn't imagine a better episode to send out into the world to give an example of what I would love to see these types of episodes turn into. So thank you for your time and for your experience, and again for your authenticity and in openness. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. I guess if I could just like post an open invitation for anyone listening who wants to talk to me more about things and be on the record, off the record, whatever. I can link you my email, or you can include my email in the show notes, and then maybe also my podcast. People can check that out if they want. So like I said, on a hiatus for a couple of years while I work on school and family life, but we do have 14 episodes up, so that's not nothing.
Well, that's not nothing. That's right. Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. So listeners, go ahead and take a look. And if you have a person who you'd love to hear from on one of these listen-in episodes, please email me, whyistaypodcast@gmail.com. I know this all kind of seems kind of crazy, guys. Like, how am I having a podcast where I talk to people about why they stay, and then I'm also sitting down and listening to people about their experiences leaving? This is my journey, and I just feel called to do it. And so that's what we're doing. And I'm glad you're here for it. So we'll see you next time, everybody. And thank you for listening in with us.